Thank you, Beatriz. It's indeed very hard to fit your research into such a short presentation time, but I honestly would like to recommend the audience to read more of articles by Beatriz, also the reports on the research of impacts of European capitals of culture. There are plenty of them online and very massive research.
And as many appendixes as you want.
So now we will have a conversation with Beatriz and Tadas. Tadi, please join us. And of course, the audience should be active in this discussion and any conversation today as well. We will soon have a few mics in the audience that you can use to give us your question. In the meantime, I will start our conversation by maybe also drawing a little picture of what we are talking about today. We're talking about European Capital of Culture, also as a ground for advancing the research of culture, of impacts of cultural projects. We know that research of impacts, also very precise KPI, key performing index indicators plan is a necessary part of European Capital of Culture, which creates a fantastic opportunity to conduct a very long-lasting research. It's not a common project to research as well. It has very wide range of projects, a very wide scope of audience, and also it's quite a long-lasting project. Most of the organizers of Capitals of Culture have seen reports of Capital of Culture impact research, and I also encourage the audience to look at them. They look most often very similar. We have what Beatriz showed us, some tourism indicators usually growing massively. We have economic impacts, social impacts. Nevertheless, it still feels like for most of us that the research is not somehow grasping all the impacts that the project might produce. And we will soon have a presentation by Roberto Magro and his team, which for me is an illustration of such cultural impact, influence on a very personal or a community level, I would say. So now we have an opportunity to speak to people who are very involved in this, very involved in making some sense of this contradictory topic of measures of cultural impacts. And I would say, well, it not only depends on what you're asking, but also who is asking the question, right? Yeah, in the research. Very often the European Capital of Culture impact research is focused on, well, proving ourselves, proving everyone that it was all worth it. It's not about going into, side researches as much as really showing why, what kind of economic and other kind of influence it succeeded in. So, first question, I think, is about the Capital of Culture as the ground for this research. Do you think, and why, this could be a good opportunity for advancing the cultural impact research? Especially Tadi, why did you take this challenge at all?
A colleague sent me this information a couple of weeks before the deadline, and then I was really came back from another country, and I thought I cannot do it now. But then I couldn't sleep a couple of days because I have to do it. I cannot say I'm sociologist of culture and not take this opportunity. It's crazy because, one thing how I see what the Capital of Culture is. It's in a way, it's a window, to the future. How also we allow ourselves to imagine how our cultural sector could be, and it will be sustained in 10 years, it will be totally normalized. So it's very rare opportunity to research future. For sociologists, it's almost impossible,
What is the future that you see in this project? Do you think that Kaunas Capital of Culture brought some significant new ideas into research field or in general in the cultural field in Lithuania?
I like the one document, and it made this experience very worthwhile. It's the application. It's a handful of dreams, but when you asked how to measure them, how to think of them, it's a very good challenge. And another thing, it's big chunk of resources, which city would maybe otherwise would never mobilize. So it's a possibility to, experiment. So that's, I think, every capital of culture, if it's successful, it grasps this opportunity and it uses. By design, capital of culture is, ability to experiment. You get an extra, symbolic capital of being capital of culture, and you show what city could be with it. So Kaunas definitely is using this opportunity, I would say.
Beatriz, do you agree? I mean, you've been in this research for a while, and there is plenty of it done not only by you, but also generally we have all kinds of research that helps us prove the different values of culture. Do you find anything that surprises you still, talking about research in cultural capitals, for example?
Yes, and obviously in my case, I also had the interesting experience of doing it with university contexts, no? Because we were discussing earlier how this can, especially one thing is research, another thing is evaluation, another thing is monitoring, depending on what is the framework, there is a different focus and priorities. I have always conducted evaluation that is complemented by research, and it has always sat within an academic context of universities. So I have found it was very important to advance knowledge in some way and try to push other colleagues in other departments. It can be extremely frustrating because obviously universities operate at a certain pace, but in terms of always making sure that you are really advancing methodologies and that, you are actually considering very carefully those kinds of questions and the diversity of those that are asking them, it has been incredibly enriching. So you end up with the kinds of reports that are best known in terms of the ones I have produced, and the ones that work and become more useful tend to be those that are more standardized. No? So there is an approach and there is a need for comparability that I think is valuable as an area of pressure. But then you have the really highly individualized, place-specific and time-specific. And that is also very important to do it in parallel and also involving other researchers. So as you were saying, having this event and initiative, it doesn't just generate a moment of enthusiasm and it's a catalyst for change in the city, it can also be a catalyst for change in learning and researching institutions. And that is what has kept me going. So the reason why I didn't abandon, even though all the many frustrations that are always there in terms of what you aspire to do and then what you can end up doing with the funding available, the resources available, the time, is that it has always triggered something else that has been enormously valuable, even if it's not an evaluation report that is shared in the same way. But in terms of PhD thesis, essays, I mean, there has been incredibly beautiful projects with the students, with colleagues that were very reluctant to see the value of these types of events. I mean, you are a sociologist. I have worked in many different types of departments, both in humanities and the social sciences. But during my time in the sociology department, I was surrounded by people that really had a very negative preconception of these events, like the Panem circus, no? I mean, it's just something that is manipulative, it's about power, it's about a top-down approach. We were able to involve them in some aspects of the research to see how many layers are there. And that was very illuminating for them. Also for me and other members of my team, in order to actually acknowledge also negative impacts or things that are problematic. And the one thing that I have not yet visualized, when I revisit those slides with some of these top findings from places like Liverpool and so on, the one thing that now with time I would like to revisit and redo is also incorporate the shades, not the things that are less clear, the findings that are not just a screaming success, because they are also very important and very valuable. So yeah, for me it's a journey. It doesn't get exhausted, because it's clear that, again, notions of value, meaning keep changing. And there are 2 or 3 projects that I'm hoping to revisit and continue that will provide another context to a lot of the data that we have been sharing. So yes, on my end is that the university collaborations has been great. And the fact that we are really genuinely advancing knowledge. We are not just offering a result for practical purposes. We are moving on, interrogating really what culture is and how complex and fascinating it is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Funny enough, the skepticism that we encountered, in fact, was less of this kind that you mentioned, that is a top-down project. Instead, very often we heard that, so this project, we understand it is more like a social project, right? Mm-hmm. It's not about arts, it's not about culture, it's about making a social change. It's not really for me. The artists were rather skeptical at the beginning involving in community projects for them was a little bit awkward. Let us try to maybe show why, because often also this research, the economic first, it was very monetarized, as you say, yes. These values. Then the social aspect of cultural value was very underlined. Why? How is it? What kind of trends do you see now in research? How are they trying to grasp the wider impacts of culture? What is the current trend?
Do you want to start, or I can? Yes. It keeps. Now there is this whole well-being, impact on health and well-being. There are really very interesting approaches there. But I also think, because we have had so many years of the econometrics approach dominating, there is now a bit more confidence in advancing also other areas without denying the value of the statistical information. I think the trick here is to really not being afraid of being transversal and of collaborating. having more transdisciplinary exchanges. Obviously now new technologies. Again, the big thing is how you do things with new technologies, but again in a way that is meaningful and it's not just a gadget. So it's not just having an app. Okay, an app is great, but what is it for? But there are really, really interesting interventions also working with scientists in terms of computer scientists and using technologies in interesting ways. So that's where I think the research could keep advancing. I then feel the value of going back to basics, And what I would like is to bring more of my humanities colleagues. So yes, I would like to involve more anthropologists and also historians, poets and artists. The other thing is just the artist-led research. That is the other big area that has always been there, but we were maybe a bit scared for a time of saying, well, where is this going to go? I think there are roots, but you need precedent. So what you need is to be able to demonstrate that you have been able to deliver evaluation and reports that are useful somehow. And once you have established that reputation as a researcher and evaluator that can help address some of these urgent pressures, then get people to dare go a bit further. And I don't know how you feel around that. So
let's take this challenge, That's how I feel. I think one thing is science, what we do. And now for the last decade, we speak about science communication. And that's something a bit different, because you have to get out of workroom, and okay, I have this one number. How do I tell a story? I don't know, I'm not specialist. Okay, I can deal with people who can do. So I think this is an important direction of communication of science. And in terms of our team, we have no choice, because you're such a good storytellers, we have to go out from our cabinet and say, one method we are trying to develop, what we now call it, is a profile-based evaluation, that we start evaluation with one story. It could be, written by a journalist, by a poet, about, a person whose life was really touched by your object of evaluation. And then through that story, you approach your data. You see, is it anecdotal? Maybe you can use mathematical modeling and see if it is or not. You can use all the statistical methods. The starting point is experience of person. So I find it very interesting. I myself am a qualitative sociologist firstly, but did statistics for 15 years. So now it's for me interesting opportunity, to take this challenge. How do you speak about Kaunas in 2022? You cannot just throw numbers. I mean, it's no, you cannot do that. So it's an interesting challenge. We'll see if we have precedent or not, or how far we will go with that. But I think the starting point is experience of people.
But that's where, if I can add, because often the discussion with the qualitative research is that it's anecdotal. And obviously because you cannot do in-depth discussions with every member or person within your population. But that's where the point that I didn't have time to go into depth with was this whole importance of knowledge transfer and having those conversations in between evaluation and research teams in the same way as it happens in other areas of the European Capital of Culture program. Because if you have, we have done a lot of lifelong stories, no? And people that you follow for 10 or 15 years, and you just have conversations from time to time, and again, how memory evolves. Some of these techniques and these personal stories, if you see, well, in Kaunas you have done it this way, and if you see that this has also happened in Lille, or it happened in Matera, and it has happened, then of a sudden it becomes something that is revealing a very important thing, even if it's just an individual, but it's happening in very different places, and it has occurred through similar factors. That is just the effect of experiencing something that feels like once in a lifetime, or that really changes the way that you relate in your city. Again, how easy it is to agree to some similarities in the way you ask the question, no? And maybe that is again an issue around backgrounds, no? So within sociologists or historians, if you can have conversations and say, okay, if we are looking at the European Capital of Culture program within the sociology field, what would be a relevant question? And could we ask it in different countries for a time? No, this is one area that I will see as a field of studies. I wonder about its credibility, no? And as publications grow, because there is now a growing literature, not just in terms of reports of evaluation, but also academic papers. There is now quite a wealth of academic research. Is becoming more advanced. We can be more ambitious and more sophisticated because we are not starting from zero.
Is there any attempt within the panel or the Commission regulating the European Capital of Culture agenda to, for example, standardize some part of research?
That's because, again, it depends. There is no power from the top because obviously it's the funding. With initiatives like with the Olympic Games, there is a lot of money. So there is a very standardized approach to impact assessment, and it covers 7-8 years, and is really regulated very much from the center. With the European Capital of Culture program, it's more open-ended. Obviously, there is a framework now that is recommended, I think, since 2017. I was involved in those recommendations. but it's quite open, which is nice in a way, but I think, it's the different teams where we should have at least a few questions or areas that are the same. Or maybe you have a list of 20 or 30 possible measures and choose at least 10 within that. And I think that would help. But always you also need to do things that are unique to you. I mean, I understand. And some of those things that you feel you are the only one that you are asking, maybe another city will say, actually, we also would like to do it in the same way. We have to be better at sharing.
Do we have any questions in the audience? Does anyone have a question? Doesn't seem so. But I encourage you, we still have a few moments for questions to be asked. A question for Beatriz. You've been in the panel, in the selection panel and monitoring panel of European Capitals of Culture for quite a few, I don't know, in fact, since
2017.
Since 17. How do you notice any development in, for example, in the agenda of European Capital of Culture, and where do you think it is going? In terms of legacy, as for us, I don't remember there was any, for example, expectation from the panel or the commission to ensure continuity, or in fact any specific expectation after 22. Do you feel there are any changes in terms of legacy, for example?
I cannot speak as panel member. I can speak as expert or as researcher on that front. I mean, I think the initiative and the way it has now very solid foundations. I mean, it's very interesting when you look back at how it has evolved since the mid-1980s, and how after a period of time where there would be a question mark around its relevance or the quality of proposals, there is really a thirst from cities. But there is a big conversation to be had about, what is it and what shape can it have going forward? So there are conversations going on. I'm coming to the end of my mandate. And obviously my interest far precedes the panel. So what I am observing, and again speaking as an academic, is that especially after what we have seen in terms of where is Europe going, what is the European project, what is the role within the European Union. I'm also very interesting in my case, I'm based in the UK. And after Brexit. So it's really interesting to continue having this kind of role and for this to be such an important part of my research portfolio whilst being based in the United Kingdom. So big questions asked about the way forward. I believe there is a need for an initiative such as this to survive and continue. But what is really, really important is to ensure that European dimension is explored and is assessed properly. And when we talk about evaluation and research, I mean, the work that I have been doing and most of the projects I have managed in Liverpool, in Glasgow, and other collaborations have a very local agenda. It's about the impact on the city, logically. It's a lot of the work is about what is the legacy for us. But what is the legacy for Europe? Who is conducting that research? And how do we define that? I mean, I think this is probably the additional layer that might have to become more central. I mean, you will always need to have a local and city-based agenda in order to have applicants and bids, because obviously most of the funding and the responsibility is in the host city. But I think what we need more of is really understand how this initiative is also contributing or having an impact on the European project, whatever that might be. Whether it helps us with conversations that are truly significant, or whether we are just looking partially into our specific and individual ECoC projects. So what is the bigger, the sum of the parts? Is this leading into something that is more ambitious? So if with the Olympic Games it's about sports, and so in our case with the European Capital of Culture, what is that bigger aspiration that goes beyond your specific edition? And how do you make sure that this is captured in some way. I don't know how we see that. I mean, for instance, here is that part of what you're asking. You know, in the case of Kaunas, how you want to change the future of the European conversation. I do think that is the one thing that will become bigger going forwards.
I don't see questions yet from the audience. There is one at the back.
Hello all. First of all, I just want to say once again thanks for Virginia, Anna, Davile, and all the others who make 2022 this extraordinary experience for all of us. Coming back to the topic of European Capital of Culture and maybe Kaunas in particular, do you see which spheres of our daily social lives are impacted the most? I mean, do you see the data on, for instance, life expectancy, empathy levels, unemployment rates, etc., etc.? Because this, you know, could help this conversation be a bit more on the ground, so to speak. And the other part of the question, maybe more to Tadas, because we talked about this on different platforms, but looking at the Kaunas 2022, do you see any parts of the program or maybe approaches to the problems that they have that could be potentially re-articulated or converted to the culture policy on the national level? So that's two questions maybe for both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, we look at these things, and I cannot shoot like hard numbers now, but one of these promises, you know, was of the program was forgetting, you know, temporary capital and being contemporary capital. So from the open-ended answers, and we have plenty of them, I see it's you read them and you understand something's going on in the city. It's definitely not the same anymore. And this is kind of a feel of fluxus that we are opened to something. So we are going to research that something put it into numbers and try to articulate it, what kind of types of approaches to your city it has created. Speaking about national policy, I think I cannot answer this question yet, but it definitely is clear that 4 or 5 themes that we are going to cover, and recommendations on legacy, a lot will depend on the national level, both including evaluation, why we have result this large or this the achievement this and not of a different scope, really still lies in national politics, because in Lithuania we still have cultural policy which is rather centralized. And I spoke about, you know, Kaunas 22 as the ability to try things out. So I think it gives a glimpse what it would look like if we would have a more regionalized cultural policy in Lithuania. So that's a big source of inspirations and things to speak about.
Beatriz, do you have a comment, a short
No,
one
I
on
think
this topic?
this happens. So this is a legacy worth aspiring to. And there are good reference of cities and ECoC hosts that have had an impact at the national level. I mean, because it's true, you get the possibility to advance approaches to dealing with culture in terms of also developing cultural strategies and so on that might not have been tested before. And yeah, advancing less centralized models and a complement to what the capital city is. So I am certain that is something that is worth pursuing. I mean, worth providing. I mean, again, you need also data, you need information to be able to assist with decision making, but it's something where there is plenty of good examples of where this has happened, and it has been really positive and sustainable. So, yeah.
I want to thank both of you first for taking part or supporting the Kaunas European Capital of Culture in your own ways, and also for being with us today here. We now have to go for a coffee break, return at 11:35. If you have any questions still in your minds left unanswered after these presentations and the talk, I suggest we keep them for a later time and next discussions that will take place. And also I want to remind you that one presentation after this short coffee break will be held in Ukrainian, so you probably really want to get a headset for interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.